Odysseus was once offered eternal life and almost didn't leave to go home. Most people know his name from the long, dangerous journey. The Cyclops, the sirens, the storms that scattered his ships across the wine-dark sea. But there was one stop on that journey that had no danger in it at all. No monster, no trial, only an island so peaceful, so outside of time, that the real danger was never wanting to leave. This is the story of that island. Let yourself settle in, if you haven't already. Let your shoulders drop, just a little. By the time he washed up on the shore of Ogygia, Odysseus had already been at sea for a long while and lost nearly everything a man can lose on a journey. His ships, his crew, the years he'd meant to spend at home instead of drifting further from it. His journey had taken him past dangers this story won't dwell on tonight. Strange islands, stranger creatures, a god's lingering anger following him across every mile of open water. None of that belongs here. What matters for tonight is only this. By the time the current finally deposited him, alone, on an unfamiliar shore, he had nothing left but the clothes on his back and whatever strength remained in his arms after days of clinging to broken wreckage. He came ashore half-drowned, salt-crusted, more exhausted than afraid, and collapsed beneath a tangle of wild olive branches at the edge of the sand. He didn't know, yet, that the island was inhabited. He only knew that the ground had stopped moving beneath him, and that felt, for the moment, like enough. The island belonged to Calypso, a nymph, some say a minor goddess, who lived alone in a cave at its center. Though cave hardly does the place justice. It opened onto a wide, sheltered clearing, ringed with cypress and alder, thick with soft violet blooms and pale parsley that grew wild along every path. A spring ran nearby, splitting into 4 clear channels that wound off in different directions, as though the island itself couldn't decide which way it most wanted to be gentle. Grapevines climbed along a trellis at the cave's mouth, heavy and green even out of season. Owls nested undisturbed in the surrounding trees. It was, by every old account, one of the most beautiful places in the whole of the ancient world. Beautiful, in a way that asked nothing of you, made no demands, simply existed, calmly, for whoever happened to find it. Seabirds with long, elegant wings nested along the cliffs above the shore, and their calls carried down to the clearing in the mornings, soft and unhurried. Meadows of soft violet crocus grew wild between the trees, opening fully only in early light and folding closed again by midday, as though even the flowers on that island kept their own gentle schedule. The air itself smelled faintly of cedar smoke, always. Calypso kept a small fire burning near the cave's entrance day and night, more from habit than necessity, and the scent of it drifted for a good distance whenever the wind was still. Calypso found Odysseus that first morning, still half asleep on the sand, and something in her. The stories don't agree on exactly what, whether it was pity or loneliness, or simply the quiet decision of someone who lived entirely alone and had just been handed unexpected company. Made her bring him in. She fed him, dried his clothes by her fire, let him sleep, properly sleep, in a corner of her cave, undisturbed by tides or wind or any further danger, for the first time in longer than he could easily remember. He stayed a while, recovering. Then he stayed longer. Calypso never asked him to leave. If anything, the opposite was true. Days folded into each other on that island in a way they didn't seem to elsewhere. There was no urgent errand, no threatening god, no crew waiting on his word. Only the spring and the vines. And Calypso's low, unhurried voice as she moved through her day. Weaving at her loom, singing softly to herself, the way people sing when they don't expect anyone to be listening. At night, she would take him to her, and by day, she'd walk with him along the shoreline, showing him which berries were sweetest, which tide pools filled with small silver fish at dawn. She had, the old tellers say, come to love him, not as a passing comfort, but properly, deeply, the way immortal things sometimes fix their whole attention on one single mortal moment and refuse to look away from it. Mornings on the island followed their own unhurried order. Calypso rose first, always, and could be heard singing softly to herself while she tended her small fire and set water to warm. An old habit, older than Odysseus himself, from all the solitary mornings before he'd arrived. He'd wake to the sound of it and the smell of wood smoke, and for a long while afterward would simply lie still, listening, before either of them said a single word. Afternoons, they gathered food together, figs from a tree near the spring, olives pressed for oil, fish caught easily enough in the shallow coves that ringed the island's southern edge. Evenings belonged to her loom, where she wove cloth threaded through with gold, singing the whole while, and to conversation that rarely hurried toward any particular point, the way conversation only manages to do when neither person is anywhere else they need to be. There was one storm, in his second year on the island, that Odysseus remembered afterward, more clearly than almost anything else from his time there. It came in fast off the water, the sky going the colour of old bronze within a single hour, and for once, the island's usual stillness gave way to something loud and restless. Wind bending the cypress nearly flat, rain hammering the cave stone mouth. Calypso built the fire higher and pulled a woven blanket around them both, and they sat together through the worst of it, saying little, simply waiting the way sailors and islanders both learn to wait out, weather that can't be argued with. By morning, the sky had cleared to something even softer than before, washed clean, and the garden path was scattered with fallen olive blossoms. Odysseus found himself, oddly, glad of the storm. It was the first time the island had shown him anything other than perfect calm, and it made the calm that followed feel earned, rather than simply given. And she offered him, eventually, the only gift a goddess could offer, that a mortal man never could refuse easily: immortality. Eternal youth. A life on that island that would never end, never age, never have to return to the plain, difficult, uncertain world of ships and kingdoms and growing old. Stay, she told him one evening as they sat together near the spring, the light gone soft and amber through the cypress branches. Stay, and none of it will ever touch you again, not the sea, not age, not one more grey hair or one more scar. I can give you forever, exactly as you are right now. Odysseus said nothing for a long while. It was, by any reasonable measure, the easiest offer any man had ever been given. No more risk, no more loss, no further grief of any kind. Only this same golden clearing, this same patient devotion, stretching on without end. You could have peace, she said again, more softly, when he still hadn't answered. Real peace. Not the kind that ends the moment the next storm comes. He didn't refuse her, not that night, and not for a long while after. He only sat with the offer, the way a man sits with a question too large to answer quickly, turning it over slowly, while the fire burned low beside them both. And for a long while, years, by most tellings, 7 of them, though some old versions stretch it further. Odysseus very nearly did stay, in every way that mattered, except the very last one. He ate at her table. He slept in her cave. He walked her shoreline every morning, as though it were the most natural rhythm in the world. The island had, in its slow and patient way, almost entirely rewritten what he thought he wanted. The seasons on Ogygia passed gently, without the harshness they carried elsewhere. Winters brought only a light, brief chill, and the fire was built up a little higher, and they sat closer beside it. Summers brought long, golden evenings that seemed to stretch further than evenings had any right to, full of birdsong and the low hum of insects settling in the warm grass. Odysseus grew tanned and steady in a way he hadn't been in years, his hands rough again from useful work, mending nets, tending the small garden Calypso kept near the spring, repairing the modest boat she used for short fishing trips along the coast. There were whole stretches of time, the old stories admit, when he was, by any honest measure, happy. Not merely resigned. Happy, the way a tired man is happy to finally stop moving. He taught her things in those years, without quite meaning to. An old rowing song from his childhood, half remembered, that he hummed while mending nets, until she'd learned the tune herself and began weaving it quietly into her own singing. A particular way of arranging stones along a garden bed, something his own mother had shown him once, long before any of this. Ships, war, wandering, had ever touched his life. Calypso kept that garden exactly as he'd shown her, long after, the old teller's note, though the stories don't dwell on how long after, turned out to mean. But there is a particular kind of ache that immortality can't quite smooth away, and it belongs only to mortal things. The small, quiet knowledge of somewhere else you're supposed to be. For Odysseus, it was Ithaca, his home, his wife Penelope, the son he'd left as an infant, and had now, without meaning to, missed the whole slow unfolding of. He never raised his voice about it. Calypso never once heard him complain. But some mornings, the old stories say, he'd walk down to the rocky point at the island's edge and simply sit there a long while, looking out at a sea that led, somewhere past the horizon, toward a home he could no longer clearly picture. Calypso saw this. She wasn't unkind, and she wasn't blind. She only, for a long while, chose not to be the one to end it. It was Zeus, in the end, who moved things along. Not out of anger, the stories agree, but out of a kind of tired fairness, the sense that 7 years was long enough for even a goddess's hospitality to have run its course. He sent Hermes, the swift messenger god, winged sandals catching the light as he crossed sea and sky in what felt, to those who witnessed such things, like a single unhurried breath. Zeus's instruction to him, the old poets say, was brief and plain. Go to the nymph's island, tell her the mortal must be released, and see that he's given what he needs to sail home safely. No anger in it. No punishment intended for anyone, only the quiet correction of something that had simply gone on a little longer than it should have. Hermes crossed the whole width of the world to deliver it. Over dark water, where dolphins broke the surface far below him, past scattered islands no larger than a fisherman's boat, until Ogygia rose up out of the sea ahead of him, exactly as beautiful as every account had promised. Even a god who'd seen every corner of the world, the stories say, paused a moment at the sight of it before continuing on to the cave. Hermes found Calypso in her cave, at her loom as always, and delivered the message plainly, without cruelty. It was time. Odysseus was to be released, given what he needed to build a raft, and sent on his way home at last. Calypso, the old tellers say, was quiet. A long moment after Hermes left, then quieter still. There's a kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply settles into a room, the way evening settles into a valley, unhurried and complete. She sat a long while at her loom, without weaving, the shuttle still in her hand, looking out past the cave's mouth, toward the shoreline, where she knew she'd find him, sitting at his usual spot on the rocky point, unaware yet that anything had changed. 7 years is a long time to love someone, immortal or not. Long enough that the ending of it however gently delivered, still needed a moment of stillness before she could carry it down to him herself. She found Odysseus at his usual spot on the rocky point and told him, without drama, that he was free to go. He didn't quite believe it at first. 7 years is a long time to stop hoping for a particular door to open, true to her word, and to whatever grace immortal beings are capable of when a thing has truly run its course. Calypso helped him build the raft herself. She gave him tools, an axe, an auger, and showed him where the straightest timber grew. She wove sailcloth with her own hands. She filled skins with wine and fresh water, packed bread and dried meat enough to last the crossing, and asked nothing further of him in return. He felled 20 trees in all, the old count goes, choosing each one carefully. Alder, poplar, towering fir, seasoned enough to hold together against open water. He shaped the planks himself, smoothing each one until it fit its neighbor cleanly, fastening the whole frame with wooden pegs and long, close-set dowels, the way a lifetime of sailing had taught him. Calypso brought cloth for the sail, and together they rigged it, testing the ropes twice over before either of them was satisfied. They worked together on that raft for 4 full days, mostly in a companionable, unspoken quiet, the kind that settles between two people who've already said, in 100 smaller ways, everything that needs saying. The hammering of pegs, the scent of cut cypress, the slow, patient shape of a boat rising out of raw timber, plank by careful plank. One evening during those 4 days, too tired to work any further, they lay back together on the warm sand and watched the stars come out over the water instead. Odysseus pointed out the one sailors used to find their way home, a habit so old in him it came out unbidden, even here, even now, with home still so far off. He named them quietly, one by one, the way his own father had once named them for him. Calypso listened without interrupting, tracing the same patterns herself once he'd shown her, though she'd known those stars far longer than he had, in her own immortal way. It didn't matter. Some things are worth hearing named again, even by someone who already knows them. On the final night before he was to leave, they sat together one last time by her fire, the way they had so many 100 evenings before. Neither spoke very much. There wasn't a great deal left to say that 7 years hadn't already said in smaller ways. In shared meals, in the sound of her loom, in every quiet morning walk along that same familiar shore. Calypso bathed him herself that last evening, the old accounts say, and dressed him in clean, fragrant clothes for the journey ahead. A small, tender ritual, more about the giving of care than any practical need. She set out one final meal between them, the same simple foods they'd shared 1,000 times before, and for a while neither of them touched it, content simply to sit together in the firelight a little longer. At some point, worn out from 4 days of labor, Odysseus fell asleep beside the fire, the way exhausted men do, fully and without struggle. Calypso stayed awake a while longer, watching him the way she'd first found him, salt, worn, at rest, entirely unaware of being watched. In the morning, she woke him gently and walked with him down to the shore where the raft sat finished, provisioned, ready. There was no argument, no final plea to stay, only a long look between them, the kind that carries most of what two people might otherwise struggle to put into words. Gratitude, on his side, for 7 years of undeserved shelter, and on hers, something quieter, harder to name, closer to the particular ache of loving something you are only ever going to be allowed to keep for a season. Go home, she told him, simply, and helped push the raft out past the shallows herself. She stood at the water's edge, a long while after, the old stories say, watching until the sail was no more than a pale mark against the horizon. She did not weep openly or call after him, or ask once more if he might reconsider. She only watched, the way she'd watched him sleep so many mornings before, giving him this last stretch of attention freely, the way she'd given him everything else. He sailed from Ogygia beneath a clear sky, the island shrinking slowly behind him, green and gold and impossibly peaceful, exactly as it had been the morning he first washed ashore. He would still face storms before Ithaca, and further trials the songs remember more loudly than this one. But none of that belongs to tonight's story. Tonight's story ends here, on the water, with a rested, well-provisioned man sailing toward a home he never entirely stopped picturing, even during the 7 gentlest, most peaceful years of his whole long journey. There's a kind of comfort in that, if you let it settle. Even paradise, offered freely, forever, wasn't quite enough to outweigh the pull of somewhere familiar, someone waiting, a life worth returning to. But there's comfort too in the 7 years themselves, in the fact that rest, real rest, doesn't have to be earned or explained. Calypso asked Odysseus for nothing when she first pulled him half-drowned from the sand. She only let him sleep. You can let yourself do the same right now, wherever you are. Let your body settle the way his did that first morning on the sand. Heavy, unhurried, finally still. After however long you've been carrying the day's small weights, you don't need to earn this rest either. It's simply here, the way the island was always there, waiting patiently for whoever needed it most. Let your breathing slow. Let your hands go loose. Let your shoulders sink further than they were a moment ago, the way Odysseus's did. That first night in Calypso's cave, safe and dry, and finally still. Starting at your feet, let them grow warm and heavy, sinking into wherever you're resting. Let that same heaviness rise slowly through your legs, settling low in your chest, easy and even. Let it move into your shoulders, easing them down and away from your ears, into your hands, uncurling them fully, into your jaw, your brow, until every part of you has gone as still and unhurried as that golden island, undisturbed by tides, by time, by anything at all that isn't this exact quiet moment. There's nowhere else you need to be tonight. No raft to build, no long crossing left ahead of you. Only rest, offered freely, the way it always should be. Let the last of tonight's thoughts settle the way that island settled behind him. Slowly, gently, still visible a while longer, then softening into distance, then gone, replaced only by open water and a clear, quiet sky. Somewhere, in the oldest versions of this story, Odysseus is still sailing home. And somewhere, just as old, Calypso is still standing at the edge of her shore, unhurried, at peace with what she gave and what she let go of. You don't have to choose between resting and returning to whatever's waiting for you tomorrow. Both can be true. Tonight, though, only one of them matters. If a small part of you is still holding on to something from today, a worry, an unfinished task, a thought that keeps circling back, you can set it down now, the way Calypso set down her grief, quietly, without needing to resolve it first. It will still be there tomorrow, if it needs to be. Tonight, it can simply wait, the way the whole world waited for one tired man to finally rest. Sleep well.